It was supposed to be a typical Saturday night. Nothing special. A house full of teenagers, loud music, maybe a few drinks, but nothing too crazy. Just a party on Thayer Avenue, in one of LA's more upscale neighborhoods. But here's the thing, what was happening at that party wasn't as innocent as it seemed. Behind the laughter and music, something was brewing. Deanna Maran, a 15-year-old girl, tried to stop a younger girl from wrecking things in the backyard. Maybe it was just a small disagreement, but it was enough to set everything off. Deanna wasn't the kind of person to let something like that slide. She had a reputation for standing up for what was right, so she tried to keep the peace. But that's when the situation took a dark turn. The girl she was trying to stop didn't take kindly to being told no. And that's when she did something that would change everything. Now imagine this. The girl she argued with calls her older half-sister, Katrina Sarkisian, for help. Katrina, 17, arrives on the scene a little after 10 p.m. You'd think she'd be there to smooth things over. But instead, things get way out of hand. In the blink of an eye, everything changes. What started as a harmless party turned into a nightmare no one saw coming. Stick around, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything. How did a simple argument spiral so quickly? Was it just a tragic accident? Or something more? If you're still with me, hit that like button and subscribe, because the story is just getting started. You won't believe where this party ends up. She was the kind of teen everyone looked up to. Bright, talented, full of life. Deanna Maran had everything going for her. A sophomore at Santa Monica High School, she was already an honors student. But she wasn't just about grades. Deanna was an athlete too. Volleyball, water polo, track. She excelled at everything she tried. She was the kind of girl who could light up a room with her smile. And in a world where so many are struggling to figure things out, Deanna had a clear path ahead of her. But that future was ripped away in a single moment of violence. On November 27, 2007, in an instant, everything changed. Deanna's promising life ended at a party, a place where she should have been safe, surrounded by friends. So what happened that night? What was it that drove a group of teens, including Deanna, to a tragic and deadly confrontation? And who was she really beyond the headlines? It's easy to remember someone by their achievements, their grades, or their athletic awards. But what was Deanna really like behind all that? Who was the girl who had everything to live for, yet found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time? Think about it. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Could anyone have seen it coming? Stay with me, because the story is far more complex than it appears on the surface. What started as a simple sibling argument soon turned into something far darker. At the heart of the chaos were two girls, caught in a web of jealousy, rivalry, and emotions that had been simmering for weeks. Katrina Sarkisian and Deanna Maran weren't strangers. They both went to the same school, had mutual friends, and yet, there was tension between them. Katrina, who was already dealing with her own struggles at home, had always felt overshadowed by Deanna's success and popularity. Deanna, the golden girl with a perfect future ahead of her, seemed to have everything Katrina wanted. But it wasn't just about who had more friends or who was better at sports. It was deeper than that. It was about family loyalty. Katrina's older sibling had their own issues with Deanna, and somehow that spilled over into the party. It started small. A harsh word here, a shove there. But quickly, things began to escalate. The clash between these two girls wasn't just about one night. It was a mixture of old wounds, family pressure, and deep-rooted insecurities. What had started as a minor disagreement was about to explode into something no one could have predicted. But what really pushed Katrina over the edge? Was it the mounting pressure from her family? Or was it the crowd of teens watching, expecting her to stand up to Deanna? The line between right and wrong was starting to blur. And when emotions are in control, things can spiral out of hand in a heartbeat. How did it go from a simple argument to a life-or-death situation? Could this tragedy have been avoided? Or was it inevitable, driven by a combination of jealousy, family loyalty, and the overwhelming pressure of being a teenager? Keep watching, because the truth might shock you. What would have happened if someone had stepped in sooner? Think about it. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. One moment, Deanna Maran was at a party trying to break up a fight. The next, she was lying on the ground, bleeding out from a brutal stab wound. What happened in that split second? Was it a push too far? A fight that escalated beyond control? The rage in Katrina Sarkisian boiled over. What had been simmering inside her for weeks finally erupted. In the chaos of the moment, a knife, meant for nothing more than a threat, was used with terrifying finality. For Deanna's family and friends, the shock was unimaginable. How could something so violent, so senseless, happen to someone so full of life? To her mother, her father, her friends who were there, nothing could have prepared them for the horror that followed. The question still lingers: what could have been done to prevent this tragedy? How did things go so wrong so quickly? This wasn't just the loss of a life. It was the loss of potential, of dreams, and the devastating realization that violence can strike in the most unexpected of ways. What happens when anger takes over? When one moment of rage forever changes everything? The question everyone wants answered is the one no one can quite explain. Why did Katrina do it? Was it a tragic outburst, a moment of pure rage that spiraled out of control? Or was there something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface, that pushed Katrina to take such a drastic step? Katrina Sarkisian, a 17-year-old girl, was a far cry from the violent image people later painted her as. In fact, she was often described as quiet, reserved, and struggling with her own emotions. Friends said she kept a lot inside. But on that night, at that party, something inside her snapped. Deanna Maran had only been trying to help, trying to stop a fight. But Katrina, caught in a storm of jealousy, anger, and perhaps feelings of being overlooked, lashed out. The moment the knife left her hand, nothing could undo the damage. But what led her to that breaking point? We know Katrina had a troubled home life, one filled with its own battles, emotional pain that many people never saw. Could that be the real story? Was she dealing with feelings of abandonment or deep-rooted anger? Or was it simply peer pressure, the weight of being surrounded by other teens in a volatile situation? One thing's for certain: the aftermath was devastating. Not just for Deanna, whose life was stolen in a moment of violence, but for Katrina's family, too. Her parents, who must have never imagined their daughter capable of such an act, were left in shock. Katrina's own fate was sealed the very next day when she took her own life, leaving behind nothing but confusion and unanswered questions. The truth is, we'll never fully know what led to that tragic moment. Was it one event that caused Katrina to snap? Or was it a lifetime of unresolved emotions that finally overwhelmed her? The mystery will always remain, haunting both families, both communities, and all those who knew them. What could have been done to prevent it? What signs were missed, if any? We'll never have the answers we crave, but perhaps the real question is, could we have understood her pain sooner? The legacy of that night isn't just the loss of a young life. It's the reminder that, sometimes, even the quietest people are carrying storms inside them. Storms we can't always see until it's too late. The heartbreak didn't end with Deanna's death. Just 24 hours later, another life was lost. This time, Katrina's. After the violence of that night, Katrina Sarkisian vanished from the scene, retreating to a place where no one could reach her. The next morning, she was found in her bedroom, her life cut short by an overdose of antidepressant pills. What drove Katrina to take such a tragic step? Was it guilt, despair, or had the weight of her actions and the consequences become too much to bear? In the aftermath of the stabbing, the emotional toll on Katrina must have been overwhelming. The guilt of what she'd done, the shame of what she'd lost. Everything spiraled quickly for her. Some say that, in the hours following Deanna's death, Katrina knew her life would never be the same. And maybe, in her mind, there was no way out. But beyond the grief and pain Katrina must have felt, there's a deeper issue at play here: mental health. Teenagers, especially ones like Katrina, often deal with emotions and struggles they're not equipped to manage. Peer pressure, family issues, self-doubt. It all builds up until it feels like there's no escape. And sadly for Katrina, there wasn't. Her suicide left a ripple of pain not just for her family, but for all those who had known her. It was a final act of despair, one that highlighted the crushing weight of mental health struggles in young people. But even as we try to understand what led to this tragic moment, we can't ignore the painful reality. 2 lives lost, 2 families destroyed, and countless others left to question how something so horrible could have happened in the first place. What if someone had intervened earlier? What if the signs of distress had been noticed before it was too late? The emotional scars of this tragedy are deep, and they will remain long after the headlines fade. For Deanna's family, there's the unbearable grief of losing their daughter. For Katrina's family, there's the haunting question of what they could have done to help her. In the end, this isn't just the story of 2 girls or one tragic night. It's a story about the silence that surrounds mental health struggles, the emotional weight of violence, and the devastating consequences that can unfold when both go unnoticed. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of self-harm or violence, please reach out for help. There are resources and people who care, and you don't have to carry that pain alone. In the wake of Deanna Maran's death, there are so many questions. Questions that still echo, unanswered. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Was there anything that could have stopped the violence before it started? It's impossible not to wonder how things could have gone so terribly wrong. Teenagers trying to have fun, without the guidance of responsible adults. What happens when you mix emotions, peer pressure, and too much freedom? We often hear that teenagers will be teenagers. But what happens when the stakes are this high? Deanna's life was cut short in a moment of violence, but the events leading up to it had been building for weeks. Tensions between her and Katrina, unresolved feelings, unspoken pressures, and a party that was too wild to control. What if there had been supervision that night? What if someone had noticed the signs of emotional strain in both girls? Katrina's struggles with jealousy and isolation, Deanna's desire to help others, perhaps even at her own expense. Could someone have stepped in before it escalated into a fight? And then there's the broader picture: mental health. What kind of pain was Katrina hiding? What pressures were weighing on her that led her to take such a drastic, irreversible action? This story isn't just about 2 girls. It's a story about the dangers of unchecked emotions, peer relationships gone wrong, and the ever-present threat of teen violence in an unsupervised environment. It's a story about a lack of communication, where both Deanna and Katrina could have been reached, could have been helped. If only someone had known how to listen, how to step in, how to guide them before the situation exploded. But the most heartbreaking question is, what could we have done to stop this? Could we have provided more support? More mental health resources for young people? More guidance for parents trying to navigate a world that feels out of control? As we reflect on this tragedy, it's impossible not to think about all the ways things could have been different. And the reality is, sometimes we never truly know what drives someone to a breaking point until it's too late. Deanna's death and Katrina's subsequent suicide are tragic reminders that we need to look closer at the emotional well-being of the young people in our lives. We need to ask the hard questions and be ready to step in when things feel like they're about to fall apart. The tragedy didn't just affect 2 families. It devastated an entire community. When Deanna Maran was killed, the loss echoed far beyond her family and friends. It rippled through her school, her teammates, and everyone who knew her. Deanna wasn't just a student at Santa Monica High School. She was a bright light, a shining example of what it meant to be a student athlete. Her coaches, her classmates, and her teammates were left in shock. "I just couldn't believe it," said one of Deanna's close friends. "She was always so full of life. I never thought something like this could happen." Her volleyball coach spoke of the hole left in the team. Deanna was more than just an athlete. She was a leader. Losing her, it's like losing a part of our family. But it wasn't just Deanna's team that felt the loss. It was the entire community. A quiet neighborhood suddenly thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Deanna's family, her parents, her siblings, were left to pick up the pieces, shattered by an unfathomable loss. And while Deanna's family mourned, so did Katrina's. Her death, just 24 hours later, left another family in grief, compounded by the guilt, the what-ifs, and the questions that would never be answered. This tragedy reminds us how fragile life is and how the pain of losing young lives can shake an entire community to its core. How do we prevent something like this from happening again? How do we protect the teens in our lives from the pressures that seem to be building around them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you feel about this tragedy? Do you think it could have been prevented? What changes need to be made to protect our kids? Please hit that like button if the story resonated with you, and subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to leave a comment. I want to know your thoughts, your feelings. Let's talk about it. We owe it to Deanna, to Katrina, and to every young life at risk